Hello, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy this kind of historical storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. How do you measure time when the sun no longer warms you? How long can faith survive when rescue becomes a rumor? What would you sacrifice to live when survival demands more than strength? And if you walked out of the mountains alive, would the mountains ever leave you? I had never seen the Andes before that day. I imagined them as distant, beautiful, something you admired from a window, not something that swallowed you whole. The flight was supposed to be simple. Montevideo to Santiago, a routine journey for a rugby team, a few friends, some family members. Laughter filled the cabin. We were young, loud, careless in the way only people who believe in tomorrow can be. I sat by the window. The clouds looked harmless at first, soft, white, almost playful. The mountains appeared slowly, like a warning we did not understand. Jagged shadows rose beneath us, cutting through the earth like broken teeth. Someone joked about turbulence. Someone prayed. Quietly. Someone slept. I remember tightening my seatbelt. Not because I was afraid, but because the plane suddenly felt smaller. The air changed. The engines groaned, not loudly, but with strain, as if they were pushing against something heavier than air. Then came the descent. At first, it felt controlled. A turn, another. The mountains pressed closer to the windows, no longer distant. No longer scenery. They were too close. Unforgivingly close. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Calm. Too calm. He said we were descending due to weather conditions. He said everything was under control. But I saw the wings. The left wing clipped the mountain first. There was no dramatic explosion, just a violent tearing sound, metal screaming as it was ripped away. The cabin lurched. Sideways. Screams erupted instantly, raw and uncontrolled. The right wing followed moments later. The plane was no longer flying. It was sliding through the sky. I remember being thrown forward, then back, then sideways. Baggage flew like weapons. Seats tore loose. The noise was unbearable. Metal, wind, voices blending into something monstrous. And then, impact. We hit the mountain at a speed no body was meant to endure. The fuselage slammed into the snow, skidding downward like a broken sled. Snow and debris burst through the cabin. The cold invaded instantly, brutal and absolute. When everything stopped, I did not realize at first that I was alive. I thought this was death, the silence afterward. I woke up buried in snow and darkness. My mouth tasted like blood and metal. My head pounded. I could not feel my legs at first, and panic rose faster than pain. People were crying. Some were screaming names. Some were not moving at all. The inside of the plane was unrecognizable. The tail section was gone. The wings were gone. The cockpit gone. What remained was a torn, hollow shell half buried in ice. The cold was immediate and merciless. It crept into our bones within minutes. We were dressed for spring, not for a frozen mountain range. Breath turned to mist instantly. Fingers went numb. Lips cracked. We did what humans always do in shock. We tried to make sense of chaos. Someone took charge. Someone else prayed aloud. We pulled survivors from the snow, counted the living, counted the dead, though we avoided saying the word. Some of us were badly injured. Broken legs, crushed ribs, deep cuts. Others sat in silence, staring, already somewhere far away. Night came quickly in the mountains. The temperature dropped so fast. It felt unnatural. We huddled inside the broken fuselage, tearing seat covers to insulate ourselves, stacking luggage as makeshift walls. No one slept. Every sound outside felt like something approaching. The wind howled like a living thing. The mountain surrounded us completely. Endless white, endless stone. There was no path down. No trees. No signs of life. Only the sky above us. Vast and indifferent. On the second day, we began to understand where we were. The Andes were not just mountains. They were a prison. The air was thin. Every movement stole breath. The sun burned during the day and vanished at night, leaving a cold so intense it felt like being crushed from the inside. We rationed what little food we had. Chocolate bars, wine bottles, a few snacks meant for A. Short flight. We told ourselves rescue would come soon. The radio still worked. We heard the news report. Our crash had been confirmed. Search planes were looking for us. We cheered. Some cried. Some laughed hysterically. Hope returned like warmth. But days passed. The search planes flew overhead, small and distant, their engines mocking us. Our white fuselage blended perfectly into the snow. We waved. We shouted. We burned anything that could smoke. They never saw us. Then one day, the radio crackled again. The search had been called off. We were presumed dead. I remember the moment clearly, not because of what was said, but because of what followed. Silence. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of understanding. We were alone. Time lost meaning after that. Days blended together. Hunger became constant, not sharp but dull and endless. It hollowed us out slowly. Our bodies weakened. Our thoughts narrowed. Some prayed harder. Some lost faith. Some stared at the mountains with a look I had never seen before. Not fear, not despair, but calculation. We buried the dead in the snow. We spoke their names softly. They were our friends, our teammates, our family. At night, the temperature dropped so low that we slept pressed against one another just to survive. Frost formed on our faces. Breathing became shallow to conserve heat. I dreamed of food, bread, meat, warm soup. I woke up angry in my own mind. And always, the mountains watched. They did not change. They did not care. The avalanche came without warning. One moment, we were talking quietly. The next, the world exploded. A wall of snow crashed into the fuselage, crushing it, burying us alive. Darkness swallowed everything. People screamed until they could not breathe. I was pinned under snow, unable to move, unable to scream. The pressure was unbearable. I thought this was how it would end, suffocated in a frozen tomb. When we dug ourselves out hours later, more of us were gone. The mountains had taken again. We were fewer now, weaker, and the truth we had been avoiding pressed closer every day. Survival was no longer about waiting. It was about choosing. By the end of the second week, hunger stopped feeling like hunger. It became something else, a quiet voice that never left, whispering the same question over and over. How badly do you want to live? No one said it out loud yet, but we were all thinking it. The mountains did not judge us. They only waited. And so did the future, whatever form it would take. When the radio went silent, something inside us followed. It was not panic. Panic is loud. What came instead was a heavy calm, the kind that settles when there is nothing left to argue with. We did not scream. We did not cry. We simply sat there, wrapped in torn seat cushions and blankets made of fabric never meant for survival, listening to the wind scrape against the broken fuselage, like fingernails against bone. The mountains had won the first battle. The days after the search was called off were the hardest to describe later, because nothing dramatic happened. And yet, everything changed. Time slowed. We stopped counting hours and started counting sunlight. When the sun reached a certain angle, we knew it was time to shift positions, to expose numb limbs, to prevent frostbite. When it vanished behind the peaks, we braced ourselves for night. The cold was not just around us. It was inside us. Breathing hurt. Thinking felt expensive. We spoke less. Words felt unnecessary, even dangerous, as if saying the wrong thing might shatter what little balance we had left. Our bodies began to change. Cheeks hollowed. Movements became deliberate, careful. Standing up required planning. Hunger no longer came in waves. It became constant, a background noise in the mind like static you could never turn off. Food was almost gone. A few crumbs of chocolate, drops of melted snow mixed with wine. We pretended not to look at one another when someone ate. Shame and envy lived side by side, unspoken. At night, dreams betrayed us. I dreamed of my mother's kitchen, of bread cracking open under my hands, of warmth. Waking up was worse than sleeping. Death became familiar. Not shocking, familiar. We spoke the names of those we had lost with the same tone we used to discuss the weather. Not because we didn't care, but because caring too much felt dangerous. We buried them deeper in the snow after the avalanche, knowing the mountain would never truly let them go. Sometimes I caught myself thinking of them not as bodies, but as weight. And that thought frightened me more than hunger. The idea did not arrive. Suddenly, it crept in quietly, disguised as logic. At first, it was never said out loud. It lived in glances, in pauses, in the way conversations ended too early. We were young. Many of us had been raised Catholic. We had grown up with clear lines between right and wrong, sacred and forbidden. But the Andes did not recognize those lines. The mountains were not cruel. They were indifferent, and indifference strips morality down to its bones. One night, as the wind screamed outside and the temperature dropped so low that breathing felt like swallowing glass, someone finally said what had been hovering between us for days. He did not raise his voice. He did not use dramatic words. He spoke carefully, as if the idea itself might shatter if mishandled. He spoke of survival. He spoke of necessity. He spoke of the dead, of how they no longer needed their bodies, while we still needed ours. No one interrupted him. No one argued. Silence followed. Not because we agreed, but because we understood the logic immediately, and understanding terrified us. That night, I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling of the fuselage, at the torn wires and bent metal, and felt something break inside me. Not my faith, but my certainty. I had always believed there were things you simply did not do. Now I was not sure. The hunger spoke again, quietly, relentlessly. I realized then that survival was not heroic. It was ugly, and it demanded honesty. The decision was not unanimous. It was never going to be. Some prayed harder. Some turned away. Some cried. But no one left, because there was nowhere to go. The Andes gave us no alternatives. No mercy, no rescue. Only time, and time was not on our side. In the end, what pushed us forward was not hunger alone. It was responsibility. We were not just individuals anymore. We were a system. If one of us weakened too much, the others would follow. Survival became collective, and collective survival required sacrifice. The first time, I could not bring myself to look. I focused on breathing, on not vomiting, on not thinking. I told myself it was temporary, that this was a bridge, not a destination. I told myself the dead would understand. I told myself God would understand. I'm still not sure if any of that was true. What I do know is that we lived. Strength returned slowly. Not fully, but enough. Enough to think clearly again. Enough to plan. We became more organized. Rations were measured carefully. Roles were assigned naturally. Those with clearer minds led. Those with weaker bodies rested. The mountains did not change, but we did. One morning, after weeks of waiting, something shifted. Not outside, inside us. We realized rescue was not coming. Not because we were pessimistic, but because we were realistic. No one knew where to look anymore. We were dots swallowed by white. Waiting was no longer strategy. It was surrender. The idea of leaving the crash site emerged slowly, cautiously. The Andes were vast, brutal, and unknown, but they were the only path left. Staying meant dying slowly. Leaving meant risking everything. I volunteered, not because I was brave, but because I was tired of waiting to disappear. We prepared as best we could. We stitched sleeping bags from insulation. We studied the mountains, guessing directions from the sun. We said things to one another that sounded like goodbyes without admitting they were. I remember standing outside the fuselage, looking back at it, the place that had kept us alive and trapped us at the same time. It looked small now, fragile, like a scar on the mountain. The Andes watched us prepare without reaction. They did not care whether we stayed or left. They had already taken what they wanted, and they were not finished. Leaving the wreck felt like betrayal. The fuselage had been our shelter, our graveyard, our last connection to the world we once knew. It was ugly, broken, and frozen, but it was familiar. The mountains beyond it were not. They were endless. When we finally stepped away, the silence changed. Inside the wreck, silence had weight. Outside, it felt hollow, as if the sound had been stripped from the air entirely. Each step sank deep into snow that resisted us like a living thing. Breathing was harder now. The air was thinner. Every movement demanded more than the body wanted to give. I did not feel heroic. I felt exposed. Behind us, the wreck shrank quickly, swallowed by scale. Ahead, the Andes rose like a wall that never ended. We told ourselves we would find civilization, just beyond the next ridge. That lie was necessary. The first day was manageable. Adrenaline carried us forward. Hunger dulled, replaced by focus. We walked in silence, saving breath, listening to the crunch of snow beneath our feet. The sun was cruel during the day. It burned our faces, reflected off the snow until our eyes throbbed. At night, the cold returned with interest, seeping through every layer we had stitched together. We slept sitting upright, backs against rock, afraid to lie down, afraid that if we did, we might not stand again. Morning always came too soon. By the second day, the mountains began to change. Not physically, but mentally. Distances stretched. Slopes that looked gentle stole ours. Peaks we believed we had reached revealed higher ridges. Behind them, the Andes played with perception. They made promises they did not keep. My legs trembled constantly now. My thoughts slowed. Sometimes I forgot what I was thinking halfway through a thought. We spoke less, not because we had nothing to say, but because speech cost energy. I became aware of my heartbeat in a way I never had before. Every beat felt loud, deliberate, precious. On the third day, despair tried to return. We climbed a ridge we believed would finally show us the other side. The descent, the valley, the end of white. Instead, we saw more mountains. Layers upon layers. Infinite. Something inside me sank. For the first time since leaving the wreck, I felt the pull of surrender. Not dramatic, just quiet acceptance. This was too big. We were too small. I thought of the others we had left behind, of their hope resting on our footsteps. That thought forced my body forward when my mind wanted to stop. Nights became battles. The cold bit deeper at higher altitude. Our makeshift sleeping bags were barely enough. We pressed together, sharing warmth, counting breaths. I dreamed of falling. Over and over, I fell not from a cliff, but into whiteness, sinking endlessly. Waking was relief and disappointment at the same time. Food was measured with painful precision. Small portions, strict timing. Eating no longer brought pleasure, only function. We spoke of home sometimes, quietly, carefully, as if the mountains might hear and take it away. I imagined my family receiving news of my death. I wondered if they had already mourned me. That thought both hurt and comforted me. If I died here, at least they would not wait forever. On the seventh day, something unexpected happened. The mountains changed shape. The slopes softened. The snow thinned in places, revealing rock beneath. The air felt heavier, richer. We descended. Each step down felt like a gift. Dangerous, exhausting, but hopeful. We saw signs we had not seen in weeks. Running water, a bird, life. I cried then, not loudly, but uncontrollably. Tears froze on my face, but I did not care. For the first time since the crash, the future felt possible again. We followed the river. It guided us gently, patiently, as if it had been waiting. The valley widened. Green appeared at the edges of our vision, not vibrant, but undeniable. Then, finally, we saw him. A man, real, alive, on horseback. I tried to speak and failed. My throat refused sound. My body shook violently. He saw us. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to horror. We must have looked unreal, thin, filthy, wrapped in rags, emerging from the mountains like ghosts. He listened. He understood. He promised help. When he rode away, I felt something loosen inside my chest, a knot I had carried for weeks. Rescue was no longer an idea. It was real. When helicopters arrived days later, the noise felt overwhelming. The wind they stirred was violent, chaotic, so different from the quiet we had lived in. As we were lifted from the mountains, I looked down. The Andes did not shrink. They remained vast, indifferent, unchanged. They had taken much from us, but they had not taken everything. Survival did not feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. The responsibility to remember, to speak, to carry the weight of those who could not leave. As the mountains disappeared beneath clouds, I realized something that still follows me today. We had left the Andes, but they would never leave us. By the time we decided to leave the mountain, I was no longer the person who had boarded the plane weeks ago. The boy who had laughed, complained about homework, and worried about small things had been buried somewhere beneath the snow. In his place stood someone quieter, harder, shaped by hunger, cold, and loss. I did not feel heroic. I felt empty, stripped down to the most basic instinct to keep moving forward. The decision to walk out of the Andes was not dramatic. There was no speech, no sudden burst of courage. It came slowly, like everything else up there. We had waited long enough. We had listened to the radio long enough. We had watched the snow long enough. Hope, when stretched too thin, begins to rot, and we could feel it happening inside us. The mountain did not care about our hope. We prepared for days, though preparation was a strange word for what we did. We had no maps, no real equipment, no knowledge of the terrain ahead. We used seat cushions, pieces of metal, scraps of fabric, and instinct. Everything we carried had once belonged to the plane, to the life before. Now those objects were no longer reminders of comfort. They were tools, or they were useless. I volunteered to go, not because I was the strongest, but because something inside me had gone quiet. Fear had burned itself out. Hunger had flattened all emotion into a dull ache. When you have nothing left to lose, the idea of dying somewhere else does not seem much worse than dying where you stand. The morning we left, the others gathered around us in silence. Their faces were thin, eyes sunken, bodies wrapped in layers that barely held together. Some of them smiled. Some of them could not meet our eyes. I understood both reactions. When someone leaves, they take hope with them. And if they fail, that hope dies too. I stepped away from the fuselage and did not look back for a long time. The first days of walking were brutal beyond anything I had imagined. The snow was not smooth or soft. It was uneven, sharp, constantly shifting beneath our feet. Every step sank, slid, or resisted. Our bodies, already weakened, protested immediately. Muscles cramped. Breath came in short, painful bursts. The cold gnawed at our bones like an animal that never slept. At night, the temperature dropped so fast it felt like being pushed underwater. We huddled together, pressing our bodies close, trying to trap heat that barely existed. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by pain, by dreams of warmth, by the fear that we would not wake up. Time lost its shape. Days blurred into each other. The sun rose, the sun set, and we kept walking. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. Words felt heavy. Everything that needed to be said had already been said back at the wreckage. Out here, language was less useful than movement. There were moments when despair crept in quietly, not as panic, but as exhaustion so deep it felt permanent. There were times I wanted to sit down and let the mountain take me. It would have been easy. The snow looked soft from a distance. The silence was inviting. The Andes had a way of making death seem peaceful. What stopped me was not courage. It was responsibility. I carried the weight of everyone we had left behind. Every step I took felt like it belonged to them as well. If I stopped, I was not only giving up on myself, I was giving up on all of them. The landscape never changed the way I expected it to. I had imagined that eventually we would descend, that the endless white would break into green or brown or something that looked like life. But the mountains kept rising, ridge after ridge, as if mocking our belief that the worst was behind us. At one point, we reached a peak that we thought must surely reveal civilization on the other side. I remember climbing it with a strange mixture of dread and hope, my legs trembling, my heart pounding in my ears. When I reached the top and looked out, my chest collapsed inward. More mountains, endless mountains. It felt like the world had narrowed into nothing but stone and snow. For a moment, I truly believed we had made a mistake, that we had walked in the wrong direction, that all of this suffering was meaningless. The thought nearly broke me. I sat down and stared at the horizon, unable to move. But then something shifted. I realized that turning back would change nothing. Whether the path ahead was long or short, it was the only path that existed. Meaning was not something we would find out there. Meaning was something we had to create by continuing. So we walked on. Our bodies began to fail in small, frightening ways. Cuts that would have healed easily before now lingered. Our lips cracked and bled. Our vision blurred at times. Hunger was no longer sharp. It had become a constant, hollow presence, like a shadow inside us. Yet there were also moments of strange clarity. I noticed details I would never have cared about before. The way the light changed on the snow at different hours, the sound of wind moving through narrow passes, the pattern of my own breath. Life had been reduced to sensation and intention. Everything else had fallen away. One afternoon, as we descended into a valley, I saw something that did not belong to the mountain. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Hunger can do that. Exhaustion can turn shadows into promises. But then I saw it again, a sign of life. Not a building, not a road, but something undeniable, something human. In that moment, I did not feel joy the way I had imagined. I felt fear, real fear, because hope, when it returns after being gone for so long, is terrifying. If it disappears again, it takes more with it than before. We moved closer, cautiously, almost reverently, and then there was no denying it. We were not alone anymore. The world we had thought lost was still there just beyond the mountains. When we finally encountered another human being, the moment felt unreal. I remember trying to speak and realizing my voice no longer worked the way it used. 2. Words came out broken, strange, shaped by weeks of silence and cold. I must have looked like something other than human myself, thin, wild, wrapped in remnants of a life that no longer existed. But they understood enough. Help was coming. The relief did not arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, cautiously, like warmth returning to numb fingers. Part of me could not believe it was real. Another part was already thinking of the others, waiting in the wreckage, counting days without knowing whether we were alive or dead. Rescue was no longer an idea. It was a responsibility. As we were taken away from the mountain, I looked back one last time. The Andes stood unchanged, indifferent, vast. They had taken so much from us, but they had also revealed something I did not. No existed inside me. Survival was not about strength. It was about refusal. Refusal to stop walking. Refusal to let silence be the final answer. Refusal to forget those who could not walk beside us anymore. The journey was not over. The hardest part was still ahead, returning to a world that would never fully understand what we had become up there. But for the first time since the crash, the direction was clear. We were going home. When I finally stood again among people who had never seen the Andes from inside its silence, I realized something unsettling. Survival does not end when rescue arrives. Survival follows you home. It waits quietly in your thoughts, in your dreams, in the moments when the world feels too loud or too easy. I was alive, yes, but I was no longer the same person who had boarded that plane months earlier. The mountains had not simply tested my body. They had dismantled my understanding of life, death, morality, and fear, then rebuilt it in a form that words could barely contain. I carried the Andes with me, not as a place, but as a presence. In the days immediately after rescue, everything moved too fast. Doctors examined us, journalists surrounded us, voices overlapped, lights flashed, and questions came endlessly. People wanted facts, explanations, timelines. They wanted to know how we survived, what we did, what choices we made. They wanted stories they could understand without feeling uncomfortable. But survival in the Andes was never simple. It was not heroic in the way stories often are. It was messy, painful, filled with hesitation, guilt, and unbearable decisions. We were not heroes. We were young men who refused to die when death insisted. The hardest part was not speaking to reporters or facing cameras. The hardest part was looking into the eyes of families who had lost someone and knowing that I was alive while their son, brother, or friend was not. There is no instruction manual for that kind of moment. No words that can make it right. All I could offer was honesty, humility, and silence when silence was deserved. At night, sleep came reluctantly. When it did, the mountains followed me into my dreams. I would wake up, gasping, convinced that the air had thinned again, that the cold was crawling back into my bones. The sound of wind could freeze me in place. Snow, even years later, could tighten my chest without warning. Survivor's guilt was not a single feeling. It was a landscape of emotions. Gratitude mixed with shame. Relief collided with grief. I asked myself questions that had no answers. Why me? Why did I live when others did not? What invisible line had separated survival from death? Over time, I learned that these questions were not meant to be solved. They were meant to be carried. The public often reduced our story to one moment, one decision, one controversial truth. They focused on what we did to survive rather than why we survived. They debated morality from warm rooms, full stomachs, and safe distances. I did not resent them for it. I understood. Without the mountains, it is impossible to truly grasp what hunger does to the mind, what isolation does to the soul, what desperation does to the boundaries we believe are unbreakable. What I wish people understood was this. In the Andes, death was not an abstract idea. It was present, constant, patient. Every decision was made under its gaze. Every morning we woke up alive felt like a fragile victory, and every night we went to sleep felt like borrowed time. Returning to normal life required learning how to live again. Simple things felt strange. Abundance felt uncomfortable. Waste felt unbearable. I could not throw food away. I could not complain about minor inconveniences. The world I had returned to felt disconnected from the reality I had endured. Yet slowly, painfully, life began to rebuild itself around the experience rather than against it. I learned to speak about the Andes not as a tragedy alone, but as a teacher. It taught me the true weight of solidarity. In the mountains, survival was never individual. It depended on trust, cooperation, and shared sacrifice. When one of us was weak, the others carried him, sometimes literally, sometimes emotionally. The Andes stripped away illusions. They revealed who we were beneath comfort, beneath routine, beneath social rules. They showed us that humanity is not defined by perfect choices, but by the refusal to abandon one another when choices disappear. I also learned that faith, whatever form it takes, is not about miracles, is about endurance, is about finding meaning when hope feels irrational, is about continuing forward even when the outcome is unknown. In the mountains, faith was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet. It was stubborn. It was the decision to wake up and try again. Years passed. The world changed. We aged. But the crash remained a dividing line in my life, before the Andes and after the Andes. Every challenge I faced afterward was measured against that frozen silence. Problems that once seemed overwhelming became manageable. Fear lost its absolute power. Yet I never forgot the cost of that resilience. I carry the names of those who did not return with me. I carry their faces, their voices, their laughter. I speak of them not as victims, but as companions. They are part of my survival story, inseparable from it. Without them, none of us would have made it home. Sometimes people ask me if I would choose to erase the experience if I could. The truth is complicated. The Andes took something from me that I will never recover. But they also gave me a clarity that few people ever achieve. A clarity about what truly matters. Life is fragile. Time is borrowed. Connection is everything. I learned that the human spirit is far more adaptable than we imagine. That morality is not weakened by survival, is tested by it. That dignity can exist even in the most undignified circumstances. And that hope does not require certainty. It only requires movement. The Andes were not just a place where we almost died. They were a place where we discovered how deeply human we could be when nothing else remained. And when I look back now, across the years, across the distance, across the memory of white silence and endless cold, I do not see only suffering. I see perseverance. I see brotherhood. I see the raw, unfiltered truth of survival. We came back alive, but part of us will always remain on that mountain, watching, remembering, and reminding us never to take a single ordinary moment for granted.